At 48 years old, I sat on a folding chair inside our dimly lit guest room among dusty storage boxes, staring at a blank wall and wondering how 18 years of marriage had dissolved over a single yellow legal pad. Lorraine had slid that paper across the dining table right as I was reaching for mashed potatoes during Sunday dinner. Written in her neat block handwriting was a weekly schedule detailing every chore she expected me to perform, from groceries on Monday to housework on Friday. My father-in-law Walter had passed away 7 weeks prior after a long illness. He was a quiet, gentle man whose calm presence used to balance out his wife's rigid demands. I missed him deeply, but grief alone did not explain why my name sat atop a full-time caregiving assignment. I tapped the paper and looked around the room. Lorraine watched me with cool impatience, while Dean kept his gaze fixed on his plate. Russell suddenly found his iced tea fascinating, and Bethany seemed deeply engrossed in her side dish. That was the exact moment I realized this was not a sudden impulse. The entire family had already met, discussed my personal schedule, and decided my life was the most expendable without bothering to consult me once. I set my fork down and asked why anyone expected me to resign from my executive role. Lorraine merely sighed as if I were being intentionally difficult, reminding me that she was now alone in a large house and could not manage daily chores by herself. When I pointed out that the written schedule demanded 5 full days every week, Dean finally spoke up. He insisted his mother simply needed help, and that somebody had to step up, completely ignoring how his siblings had casually assigned that role to me. I looked directly at Russell, who was 56 years old, healthy, and lived less than 40 minutes away. He quickly wiped his mouth with a napkin and claimed his sales job kept him traveling across the region for half the week. Bethany immediately shrugged defensively before I even addressed her directly, offering the excuse that her 2 teenagers kept her far too busy. Dean chimed in next, reminding everyone of his demanding work hours, which prompted a bitter laugh from me. I reminded them that I directed procurement for an entire hospital system, a position paying 6 figures that required immense daily focus. Lorraine casually dismissed my entire career as if I were merely selling homemade candles at a local weekend market. When I listed the absurd expectations including cooking, deep cleaning, bill management, and daily chauffeur duties, Lorraine defensively claimed money was not everything. I agreed, noting that this was about them eliminating my independence without asking. Dean snapped at me for making his mother feel like a heavy burden, but I stood my ground, asking why caring for his mother became my exclusive duty before anyone bothered to talk to me. The room fell silent as 3 adults stared downward. Dinner ended without formal goodbyes. On the drive home, Dean gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, accusing me of embarrassing his grieving mother in front of the entire family after her tragic loss. I countered that I had spent nearly a year helping care for Walter before he passed, that Dean dismissed my efforts, claiming I turned family support into a scorecard. Then he revealed a secret that had been hidden from me for months. He admitted that before his father passed, he had personally promised Walter that Lorraine would never have to rely on strangers or enter an assisted living facility. I sat in shocked silence as I realized he had made a vow using my time. When we arrived home, a heated argument erupted inside the kitchen. Dean tried to argue that we could adjust financially if I quit my job. But as soon as I listed our mortgage, our emergency savings, and his truck payments, he accused me of cold calculations. I looked at my husband of nearly 2 decades and explained that I was willing to assist his mother, but I refused to become an unpaid servant simply because his relatives viewed my professional career as secondary. That was when Dean uttered words that shattered our foundation. He looked me in the eye and declared that if I could not perform this duty for his family, perhaps we should not remain married, issuing a direct ultimatum to obey or face divorce. Instead of crying or pleading, I walked over to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a cheap plastic pen, and slid it across the counter toward him. asking where I needed to sign the legal papers. His face drained of color as he realized I would not be intimidated by threats. He tried to backtrack, claiming he spoke out of sudden anger, that the damage was done, and I retreated to the guest room for the evening. I barely slept a single hour that night. The following morning at 7:30, I sat inside my car outside my office building, staring at lukewarm coffee, before searching online for a reputable family law firm nearby. By 8:15, I spoke with an attorney named Dana Whitaker, who scheduled me for a late morning consultation following a cancellation. Sitting in her office later that day, I explained the situation while she took detailed notes. Dana was a practical woman in her 50s who made it clear that divorce was a serious process, rather than a quick tool to teach a spouse a lesson. She advised me to gather financial records while keeping our shared bank accounts stable. She assured me that her purpose was not forcing a marriage to end, but protecting my legal rights if I ultimately decided to move forward with separation. I left her office holding a folder of legal documents and a heavy heart. That afternoon, Lorraine called my office phone to inform me that Dean had explained my overreaction. When I asked her to clarify her actual needs, she rattled off an extensive list including house cleaning, laundry, groceries, and daily transportation. When I pointed out that she was describing a full-time position, she argued that family does not charge family for help. I quietly responded that family usually asks for assistance rather than demanding it, before ending the call to return to work. That evening, Dean and I ate dinner in absolute silence. Late that night, my phone chimed with a message in the family group chat, where Lorraine was demanding immediate help because she could not locate her dental paperwork. For 18 years, I would have dropped everything to resolve her problem immediately. This time, I deliberately placed my phone face down on the nightstand, letting her biological children step up and handle her request for once. The following evening, I offered Dean a reasonable compromise at the kitchen table. I proposed that he, Russell, and Bethany split routine tasks, and that we hire professional home assistants for whatever responsibilities they could not cover together. Dean instantly rejected the proposal, claiming his mother refused to allow strangers inside her home. When I told him that she would have to choose what mattered more, he looked at me as if I were a complete stranger who lacked compassion. Seeing that nothing had changed, I returned to Dana's office the next afternoon and signed a formal retainer agreement. When I brought the legal paperwork home and left it on the kitchen counter, Dean stared at the letterhead in total disbelief. He accused me of trying to frighten him with legal action, but I calmly pointed out that he was the one who had threatened our marriage first. Within 48 hours, I secured a short-term lease on a modest furnished apartment near my workplace. Packing my bags while Dean stood silently in the bedroom doorway was difficult. He asked if moving out was truly necessary, but I honestly replied that I needed a neutral space to process everything without constant emotional pressure. My first night alone inside the apartment was quiet. While unpacking a small bag of groceries I had purchased at the local market, I found a box of specialized crackers that Dean loved, which I had bought out of pure habit. I sat down at the small kitchen counter and wept quietly. I still loved my husband deeply, but the pain of his betrayal and the anger over his unfair expectations coexisted inside me just as strongly. The true test of their family dynamic began a few days later. On Tuesday afternoon, Russell called my office in a panic because he received an urgent property insurance renewal notice regarding past roof repairs at Lorraine's house. He expected me to have all the paperwork filed and ready, but I simply told him that documents were likely inside Lorraine's filing cabinet. He sighed in frustration, complaining that he lacked time to drive over and search through old files. By Wednesday afternoon, Russell was forced to leave work early to meet a local roofing contractor at his mother's house. He called me from her driveway, completely exhausted, asking how I had managed to track these endless details for years. I quietly told him that I managed it simply by doing the work without anyone ever noticing or thanking me. There was a long pause on the line before he admitted in a subdued voice that my point was valid. On Thursday morning, Bethany called me in a panic because Lorraine had completely missed a critical cardiology follow-up appointment scheduled weeks in advance. She demanded to know why the appointment was missing from the shared calendar. I reminded her that I no longer managed Lorraine's personal schedule and suggested that she take over the calendar moving forward. Bethany became defensive, insisting that her 2 teenagers made her routine far too chaotic for extra tasks. I asked her directly why having a family made her time valuable, while having a career made my time expendable. She went silent for a moment before hanging up the phone, unable to formulate a response. Late Thursday night, my phone rang at 11 o'clock. It was Lorraine, complaining that her home thermostat was reading 66 degrees, and that neither Dean nor Russell were answering their phones to assist her. For a brief second, the old habit of playing the savior almost took over. I pictured myself driving across town in the middle of the night to adjust her furnace, but I took a deep breath and remembered that setting boundaries was essential. I calmly told her to look at the emergency phone number printed directly on the front of the furnace and call a professional technician to handle the repair. When she realized I was not coming over, she went quiet and slowly hung up. The house did not freeze, and the furnace was repaired the following morning after Dean arranged the service visit. The family was finally realizing that the world would continue turning even if I was not constantly managing their personal lives. A week later, Lorraine accidentally fell down the bottom steps of her porch while carrying laundry, bruising her hip. Bethany called me from urgent care, and despite everything, I immediately drove over to check on her, finding her looking frail and embarrassed. Later that evening, Russell summoned the family for a mandatory meeting at Lorraine's home. Tensions ran high as the siblings argued about schedules, but the turning point came when Joanne, Russell's wife, spoke up and reminded everyone that no one ever demanded she abandon her life. The room went completely still when Dean admitted to his mother that he had tried to force me into taking care of her, simply because disappointing his wife was easier than disappointing his mother. It was an embarrassing confession, but honest. I handed out folders containing researched options for professional elder care, transportation services, and companion aids. After a long silence, Lorraine finally broke down and confessed that her demands stemmed from deep fear and grief following Walter's death. We established a balanced system where Dean, Russell, and Bethany shared responsibilities, while a wonderful companion named Gloria was hired to assist Lorraine 3 mornings a week. Although Lorraine initially resisted, she eventually developed a warm friendship with Gloria over card games. Dean began attending personal counseling to address his people-pleasing habits and boundaries. Over the next 4 months, we attended couples therapy together, learning to communicate openly, deconstruct toxic family patterns, and rebuild our trust step by step. Eventually, I moved back into our home, taking with me the cheap plastic pen I had pulled from the drawer that life-changing night. It remained on my desk as a lasting reminder that my dignity, career, and time were worth standing up for. I learned that setting firm boundaries is not an act of selfishness, but an essential step in teaching the people you love how to truly